Okay, good afternoon. Afternoon, right? Okay, so thank you for the welcome. As you've mentioned, my name is Mabatu Langa, and I'm a physiotherapist based in Limpopo, and my background is in public health and with a focus on rural health. And I am also an Atlantic Fellow, a current Atlantic Fellow for Health Equity, which is based at decolonial. So the Atlantic Fellows for Health Equity based at decolonial is a leadership program for health equity in South Africa. It is about strengthening the capacities of progressive social change leaders to tackle the deep social and economic inequalities in South Africa that impacts the health of its citizens. So as part of the Atlantic Fellowship Program, fellows must collaborate on developing a concept for a social change initiative that addresses certain health inequalities. So our group is focusing on exploring a decolonial approach to address mental health related issues in rural Limpopo province. Okay, so this is our team. We are 3 fellows from different backgrounds. It is a collaborative initiative. So I'm working on this project with Tendai, who is a master's student in psychology, and Zandile, who is an activist and a social and behavioral change communications manager, whose activism is more in HIV and gender-based violence. We are also partnered with Inside Out NPO, which is an NPO which is based in Cape Town, and it is a collective of trainers and community-based workers with experience in community development, youth work, social justice, gender work, and general activism, as well as work on intergenerational traumas. So South Africa is facing a mental health pandemic that can no longer be ignored. And social and economic inequalities, war and climate crisis are among the global structural threats to mental health of people. So South Africa is a wounded nation that still carries the emotional and psychological weight that was impacted by the violent forms of colonization and apartheid. The South African Constitution guarantees the right to health care for everyone living in South Africa. However, access to mental health care is still a problem, particularly to underprivileged and vulnerable communities, such as people in the rural areas. The Euro-American healing modalities do not always speak to the everyday lived experiences of the people of South Africa. And most South Africans still make use of traditional ways of healing. So we are not disputing the Euro-American healing approach or the Western methods, but our approach on decolonization in this context is to rethink the Western individualistic care as a standard. We argue that the universal approach ignores local context. So what is mental health? According to the World Health Organization, mental health is a state of well-being in which every person realizes his or her own potential, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to contribute to his or her community. So our project is, like I mentioned, it's based in Limpopo. And why Limpopo? Because Limpopo is one of the most predominantly rural provinces in South Africa. Over 80% of the population resides in rural areas. And of course, rural areas have got challenges that make it unique as opposed to urban or suburban. So the historical aspect of rural areas cannot be denied. Most rural areas are poorly resourced, and it's people of low socioeconomic status, and there's always a problem of fragmented families. Cultural beliefs is also one thing that is unique in the rural areas. Most rural communities are still deep in culture and tradition. Also, access in terms of roads and availability of resources. This is just a picture of one of the villages in Limpopo, and those are two therapists, it's an occupational therapist and myself during a home visit, just to give an idea of what rural Limpopo looks like for us. So our project is to develop a decolonial collaborative concept to address mental health related issues in rural Limpopo. So our objectives are to explore the community's understanding of mental health. One thing that stood out during this process is that mental health does not exist, or there's no word for it in the African language. So we want to explore the community's understanding of mental health so that we can come up with solutions towards those problems. So we also want to understand indigenous knowledge in addressing mental health related issues in the community. With regards to indigenous knowledge, we have realized that, and that was evident during COVID, that most rural communities do make use of indigenous and traditional methods. During COVID in Limpopo, we had something called Lingana. I don't know what you call it, which we used to steam with, thank you, which we used to steam with. So those things are there and they need to be explored. And we also want to find out the community's agency in practicing indigenous methods of healing relating to mental health. We also want to investigate the current practices in relation to mental health in the community. An example that I can give is that most communities do have ways of dealing with mental health, just that they are not, there's no label to it. For instance, in one of our home visits, we found a gentleman who was affected by COVID and was not employed. And we asked him, how are you feeling? How are you coping? And he says that I just take a walk and I just take a hike and then I feel better. And that is how someone deals with mental health. And we also want to move away from the individualistic approach and look at it from more of a community healing approach. So this is something that is currently underway. And so what we have done so far is met up with the health workers. We have negotiated for community entry through the tribal council. We are yet to have a mass meeting with all the indunas or the chiefs of the village. And we are planning on having a community dialogue. And from there, we want to reflect on the community engagement and come up with sustainable methods to address issues which were raised. From there on, then we are going to have a feedback to the community. So in our method, we want to implement something that is going to be sustainable, because most often NGOs come into the space and implement something, and once they leave, then that whole process is done. So we want something that empowers the community, and even when us as an NGO leave the space, they can still continue with that. Okay, so the themes that have arisen during this process is that there is a need to reassess the language around mental health. There is also a need for a culturally inclusive healthcare approach, and there is a need to involve everyone in the decision-making process as a form of empowerment. There is also a need to celebrate and acknowledge heritage and traditions as they speak to one's identity. In conclusion, it's just a quote around mental health that there is no health without mental health. And mental health is too important to be left to the professionals alone. And mental health is everyone's business. Thank you.
Someone online? Not yet. Anyone from the audience that would like to comment? They have a question, Mabatu? Were you dead clear? But yeah, there's also add to what it's important what Mpo, your name? Yes, said in, yeah, I just never knew that